Good evening from my studio in Hamburg this evening, not from home as usual, with this nice big Tibetan bowl, which would have gone on and on and on if I hadn't stopped it. My apologies, the stream crashed right as I started it at 8 p.m. This is now a new stream I had to set up, and I'll give those who may be joining us from the email I just sent out to everyone to give them a little longer to come here with us. Everything was all ready and set up and rolling along nicely. And then I hit start stream, and it lasted exactly a second, and then it was finished. So, while we wait for other people to find their way to this live cast this evening, let's already settle in and take a moment to follow the breath, the movement of your own breath as you settle in. And then, as you are settling in, listen to your own pulses at one of your wrists. If you have already learned where exactly to listen for pulses in Jin-Jin-Jitsu, use what you've been taught. But if you haven't, it doesn't really matter that much where you listen to the pulses, because the rhythms you hear will be the same anywhere. Anywhere you touch on either of your wrists, the rhythm will be the same, because it is the literal physical rhythm of your pulse, which, when we are not mistaken, is the same on both wrists and anywhere on the wrist. Get a sense, settle in to listening to that particular pulse, rhythm, and the less you engage your mind trying to make sense of it, the less you engage your mind, the more you can just taste the flavor of the pulse rhythm, so to speak. In other words, you can let the part of you that just knows when something feels tonic, full of tone, sluggish, dull, fast, excited, rapid, and many other things. And you may have a word for what it is you are feeling, and you may have no word for what it is that you are feeling. Either way, it is possible to get a clear sense of how the rhythm is feeling to you. Oh, it's one of those or it's one of those. Whether you have a word you would put after one of those or not. It is easy, it is possible, it is easily possible when your thinking mind isn't trying to dominate. It is easy to just pick up on what this rhythm feels like. And then, after you have really tuned into that, remove your hand from your wrist, whichever wrist it was that you were holding, and rest the hands in your lap. Check if you can still feel the rhythm pulsating elsewhere in your body. Often that's the case. You may feel it at your neck, in your chest. You may feel it clearly and in the foreground, or more as a hint of a pulsation in the background. And then shift your attention away from your pulsation, from the pulsations in your body and the pulse at the wrist, and shift your conscious awareness to your thinking. Just take in the rhythm of the thoughts that are going through your mind. And there again, rather than trying to analyze or label the cadence of thoughts that are going through your mind, just get a feel for the kind of rhythm, just like you get a sense for the rhythm at which a person is talking. You don't have to analyze the kind of cadence it is. The rhythm or cadence of a person speaking has an immediate effect on you. Depending on your conditioning, you may feel drawn to go along with the person's rhythm of thinking and speaking. You may feel drawn to resist it. What you feel prompted to do may very much depend on the kind of rhythm you're picking up on, but perceiving the rhythm of another's actions, movements, and words is something automatic and ancient in each of us. As you observe the rhythm or cadence of your thoughts, Notice if that rhythm is changing in any way. Finally, shift your awareness, shift your attention again to the rhythm of your breath, your breathing. Again, noticing as well whether the fact that you're observing the rhythm you are breathing in already affects the rhythm that you're breathing in. Notice what the observation of the rhythm of your breathing does to you. What the fact that you're noticing the kind of rhythm that your breathing has causes you to do or be, whether it allows any settling, whether it changes anything at all. And after you've gotten a taste, a sense of that, go back to listening to the rhythm of your pulses at your wrist, as we did in the beginning. And again, going back to the most basic sense of what that rhythm feels like, what that rhythm makes you feel like, what that rhythm tastes of, so to speak, what that rhythm conveys to you. Take in whether there's been a change from a few minutes ago when you first took in the rhythm of your pulses. We learn that pulse rhythms, as different from pulse textures and the places where, when we know specifically where to listen for pulses, tell us about the body and the person. We learn that pulse rhythms, as differently from pulse textures and pulse places, tell us about the physical body, what is happening in the manifested body right now. So, as you were listening to the rhythm of your pulse, but also tuning in on the rhythm of your thinking in the moment and the rhythm of your breathing in the moment, you were undoubtedly tuning in to the right here, right now, present moment state of your body and your embodied being. Pulse textures tell us about what's happening on thought level or impulse level, a level that often precedes the manifestation of the things that are happening on a vibratory level. But when you talk about the rhythm, when you are listening and tuning into the rhythm, you are definitely tuning into what is actually present and manifested right now. And with any luck, you will have observed clearly and observe more clearly every time you repeat this very, very simple practice, that becoming conscious, becoming sensorially aware of the rhythm that you are in, the bodily, the mental, the emotional, any rhythm that you are in the moment, tends to change, if it needs any kind of harmonizing at all, the moment you get conscious of it. So, once again, you will already have observed perhaps, that as soon as you become aware of the rhythm at which you're speaking, you tend to speak differently, or at least check whether the rhythm, the cadence of your words is serving you, is accurately mirroring what it is you are trying to get across. When you observe your body's rhythms, the body's rhythms may immediately calm down. The rhythm of breathing often does that, etc., etc. Why? Because if there's any race or any rushing in your thoughts, your feelings, your body, this is often because whatever part has resorted to rushing, of course, when there's no real outer need for rushing, the part that's doing the rushing in absence of a real need to do so feels alone. And the minute your conscious awareness comes in and perceives what's there in terms of the rhythm right now, there's no way that part could still feel alone, because this consciousness, or awareness I should say, there is awareness now just taking in what's there right now. So any of us, when we are truly being seen, heard, listened to, tend to feel safe, or at least safer than before, and therefore we settle down. So this happens anytime that we actually start realizing the rhythm that we are doing, thinking and feeling things in. It's a fun level to play with. And if I take it back to reimagining pulse listening, again, the idea that tuning into a rhythm already helps calm that rhythm is just as important as realizing that, okay, so rhythms, to be quite clear on this, tell me about what's going on with the person, the body, the embodied being, right this moment. And therefore, it stands to reason that this is something we would attend to first. It seems a simple thought that I'm expressing here. At first, attend to what's there right now. But our minds, especially when they want to be advanced and sophisticated, often stand in the way of that, excuse me, very simple realization. because they think, yes, but what's here right now is the result of something deeper, etc., etc. Yes, that may all be true, but help the part or parts that are feeling all alone and a little overwhelmed or rushed or excited right now. Help them feel that there's somebody home, awareness is present, and they'll calm down. And then the other work that looks to deeper levels and to more causal levels and to the level of synchronicity stand a chance. All those levels then stand a chance of being heard and being brought into resonance with the simple act of listening, of bringing awareness. I corrected myself a little while ago saying consciousness, and then I said, or awareness, I should say. Now, as usual with words, they mean different things to different people. Most people, when speaking English, use awareness and consciousness synonymously. I have recently adopted the use of those two terms that I found explained by Loch Kelly, Loch, L-O-C-H, like Loch Ness, Kelly as in the Kelly family. Loch Kelly, who teaches effortless mindfulness, there's a book by him of that title. And for him, consciousness and awareness are not the same. You can read up his definition. I can't now exactly recall his definition of consciousness. I don't think he means something purely mental by that. He does mean something purely of the mind when he speaks of attention. And when he speaks of awareness, my understanding is that he means what I have been meaning for years when I talk about sensory awareness. Now, he distinguishes between sensation and awareness, but to come back to what I've been talking about today, when your awareness is with the rhythm of your breath, your pulse, or whatever it is, that means you are feeling the rhythm from within the rhythm. Your full awareness is there. You're not thinking about it. You're not reflecting on it. It's also not consciousness in some abstract sense. So to some people, consciousness means the stuff the universe is made of. That's a different thing. Awareness is aware of something. So this, feeling, sensing, or as I like to often say, tasting what is here right now, is that simultaneous presence of, I'll just stick with my vocabulary, is what I call sensory awareness. The effect of it is immediate, it is observable, and it's reliable. So, when a rhythm is what talks to you in the pulses, it makes sense to work with what it is telling you first, so that the subtler levels of work can then happen. That's the basic summary of how to work with rhythms when they show up in the pulses. That's a technical hint. I hope the exercise has given you much more than just a technical hint and something really fun, specific, and concrete to play with that will calm your body 100% of the time. It will calm your embodied self 100% of the time. 100% of the time. It may not always bring you to complete serenity. It will always, however, bring a sense of greater ease and comfort than you had before. Maybe you're witnessing yourself in the middle of a family reunion being the same fast talker or defender or the same, hurried pulling back or whatever it is that you are familiar with as your behavior. And the minute you notice that, the part of you that may not be able to kick out of the rushing or the defense or the quick speaking or the speaking too much, the part that may not be able to kick out of that behavior right away, nonetheless feels less alone and therefore less alarmed and less rushed. Try it out. Try it out often. And with that, I come to the questions and the feedback that I've received. The first couple of questions come from Antonio, and they were actually from a month ago. They came just after the June Q&A, and so I forgot to include them in the July Q&A, especially since I already answered him in an email. But they're of interest for everybody, so here they go. Here they come. Can you please clarify what Mary meant to say with the quote you've mentioned at the end of the additional practice of the month of June? Exactly what do you mean by cherishing opinions? Did she mean stubborn or a little less than that? The quote by Mary that I gave that month was that Mary used to say, you don't have to run after illumination, just stop cherishing opinions. So what she meant by that is when we become enamored with viewpoints that we've held for a long time, when we fall in love with our own opinions, that is pretty much the only thing that stands between us and a very simple, enlightened state of mind. Whenever we don't have the kind of attachment to our particular worldview and our opinions, there's a lot of light already there. So when most of us observe ourselves, how much time we can manage to let pass between two opinions that we hold fast to, we'll find out in a humbling way that there isn't much time that passes often. And she would say that that's all we needed to do. She left it at that simple sentence I quoted, So just practice checking how dear your opinions are to you and see where that takes you. And the second question, when we talk about listening to the pulses, we refer to left and right pulses. We are talking about the pulses of the client, right? Yes, absolutely. And I just want to make that clear for everybody. When we talk about left and right, we are always talking about left wrist of the client, left wrist of the client, right wrist of the client, sorry. Left or right refers to left and right on the client. The next is actually a comment that Jana left in the corresponding post in the study circle or in the pulse listening journey. But I wanted to quote it. It's in the context of an exercise where I used the metaphor of a garden. And I explained that when we sit in a garden, so this is month 5, of the pulse listening journey, right? So we have discovered many different aspects and layers of pulse listening. And with all that information, our mind will often kick into, there's so much to hear, there's so much to see, I can't keep it all straight, I don't know where to look first, this is way too much, etc. The mind protests having so much information, which is what took me to the metaphor of the garden. We don't generally sit in gardens thinking, oh my God, look at all these different flowers, all these colors to take in, all the shapes, and then is the humming of insects and the chirping of birds. I can't deal with it, it's way too much. So I ask the question of what it is that makes us not only tolerate, but actually seek out the multiplicity of visual and auditory and olfactory input in gardens. We love the fact that there's so much there. We love feeling immersed in the world in a way where we don't just tolerate, but actively realize that there is more out there to take in than any one of us can seize at any given moment. We absolutely know and we deeply enjoy that there is more than any of us can take in at the same time at any given moment. That's what Jana is referring to in the following comment. I only understand now, and it's never too late, that I don't need to follow the steps. How, where, top, middle, hip line, rhythm, in that order. But just listen and welcome what appeals to me when I enter a garden, like, for example, the brightest color or most beautiful flower, a perfume, the structure of a leaf, a little bird hiding. That image helped a lot, thanks. There's another comment on that Taj wrote that's also beautiful, but I didn't copy that over here. So this sense of, dare I be touched by the thing that just speaks to me when I'm not trying or efforting, is a key notion, not just if you want to learn how to listen to pulses in a competent fashion, but if you want to use Jinshin Jitsu as an art at all, or indeed anything that you want to practice as an art, or indeed if you just want to go through life in a simple and joyful manner. So, as I announced, I believe in last month's Q&A already, as I announced in a newsletter I sent out already, and you'll be able to sign up for my newsletter through the link I'll show briefly now, and then again at the end, if you don't already receive it. I announced in the last newsletter that I'm actually continuing the journey of pulse listening for another month, so we can integrate the materials and I can go more deeply into points that members would like me to see expound on. So I asked members to give me their input, and some have, and among the people who did send me some requests for further exploration, there were, well, Michal was one of them, and she sent a couple of questions that I don't want to treat in a whole chapter in the month of September, but do find fruitful to potentially discuss here. So let me go into these. In her book you once recommended, author Véronique Lenormand tells the story of how Jiro Murai predicted his death 2 years in advance. Véronique Lenormand wrote a book in French that was then translated into English and published in the United States called The Square Light of the Moon. It's the account of her trip to Japan, trying to find traces of Jiro Murai's work, and she finds no trace of his biography, but finds many a cultural trace of what may be the background to some of the stories that we've heard. The stories she quotes are not stories she found in Japan or found out in Japan, but has heard elsewhere. So I too have heard that Jiro Murai, after conducting an experiment on himself, artificially lowering his blood pressure, allegedly, after calculating that there was, he deemed, a certain point of no return. If you lowered your blood pressure below a certain point, he deemed, there was no return possible. So this is one version of the story that I've heard. You know, it was told differently at different times. I heard it told by Mary, that's what I'm quoting. Actually, no, the bit about the blood pressure is not from, I can't swear who I heard that from, whether that was Cato or whether that was Mary. I do know for certain that she did say he listened to his pulses after one of his experiments and said, yep, I was right. This was past the point of no return, and now I have this much time left to live. I don't recall that being 2 years. I recall it being a shorter period, but the reason I'm going into as much detail is, well, it'll show up in my answer. I'll continue reading the question. Muraya apparently told Haruki Kato that he should learn whatever he needed during that period. This begs the question of listening to pulses in a predictive manner and hearing the future. Reading this made me think of a few things. I always thought we were listening of what is happening in someone's life in the moment. And yes, a strong texture pulse might be talking about what is unmanifesting, preparing to manifest perhaps. I was very surprised to hear that he heard the future, so to speak. Was Jiro the only person to do this? Did Mary ever talk about it? And what on earth might he have heard? Well, a couple of answers to that. The reason I went into the story first is he found confirmation in his pulses of something that he had previously been convinced of. This, to me, is an important bit of information because I am certainly in no position to say whether the outcome would have been the same had he not been convinced that it would be. There's just no one who can prove that. Now, what on earth he may have heard, this I have heard has to do with the order in which the pulses appear. And I guess this relates to what shows up in Tibetan medicine and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but especially in traditional Chinese medicine and the order of dissolution of the body. So I guess it must be something about if this is what you hear first and this is what you hear, and I'm just using my fingers as in counting. I'm not pointing to them as they relate to depths, okay? So if you hear this thing first and then that and then that and then that and then that, it's the order of building, and if you hear it the other way around, it's the order of dissolving. There may be some concept of that kind behind it. I have carefully avoided finding out anything more about that. Mary never did talk about that, as far as I know. She certainly never did to me. And I personally wouldn't want to know, but that's personal to me for a very specific reason. Not because it frightens me. I don't know whether it would or wouldn't. But because, again, I believe I can only say from hearsay, when it's that order, it means so-and-so. And once I adhere to a certain set of explanation, that will shape my expectations, and my expectations will have a very real influence on myself, if I'm the one concerned, but even on a client if they are concerned. So I simply don't feel comfortable with predicting the future in any way, shape, or form. Not because I believe that we all have free will and nothing is written. I think free will, as it is often discussed, is a misunderstanding and an exaggeration. I don't think that most of us are free most of the time to decide anything, really. We just function following our conditioning. What could be meant by free will, perhaps, what might exist, what might make sense when we look at the reality of our deeply conditioned functioning, of our deeply conditioned selves, is that sometimes there are moments of such presence and awareness that we can see ourselves heading towards a fork in the road, a proverbial fork in the road, and we can already feel ourselves going down to the path most traveled, and we feel we still have the inner availability to decide otherwise. These moments are rare. Most moments we will just choose the path on that fork in the road that we have taken most often, that has the strongest pull, the loudest cry, whatever. But sometimes we've all had these moments where, while I could already see myself going down that road out of habit, something followed the nudge to go the other way. So that kind of delicate possibility of change, I think, gets smothered by a sense of an ability to predict the future. Whether Mary never engaged in this because she believed it was not useful, or whether she didn't believe she had sufficient knowledge to do it, I don't know. My guess would be that she knew better than to want to predict anything, so as not to hinder the freedom of any harmonizing event that might occur. But that is only my guess, because that certainly is my choice and my preference. I choose not to learn to predict anything, which is different from picking up in a person's pulse textures, in a person's thought process, the general direction they are steering their ship in, which then allows us to say that if the ship continues following that course, this is where it's heading, right? That's different from predicting the future. It's just getting a sense of, we do not have to hit the wall or roadblock that this is currently heading for. And this is something Mary addressed frequently. When she was talking about pulse listening, she very frequently said that Jinshin Jyutsu was truly preventive medicine, that because we feel things in the pulses that have not yet manifested, it is possible to harmonize the person in such a way that they then do not have to manifest, which again is different from foretelling the future. It is simply picking up, this is where this ship's headed, we can still course correct before it goes there all the way. But yeah, that's something Mary frequently talked about. Then on another matter linked to his life, to Jeremiah's life, more than to pulse listening in particular, although I wonder, I was most curious to read that there is so little known about his life, which seems to suggest a great humility on his part. Well, I think actually, Michal, it also simply speaks of the fact that he spent his last years, decades maybe, wandering. I mean, he was just not very sedentary. He was always moving and researching, etc., etc. And to him, it wasn't about himself. It was about researching while he had time and passing that on if there was a taker, so to speak. So I don't think it was humility in any active sense. I don't think it was humility in the sense of, oh, I mustn't make it about me, rather than just he didn't make it about him because he was passionate about what he was researching. And that made me wonder how much humility is as much a quality that is part of the sensibility intrinsic to Jinshin Jyutsu as is compassion. Well, that depends on what we mean by humility. If we deeply know and simply know that the work isn't about me and it is about me, and we know in how far it is about me and in how far it isn't. In other words, I am just the cable, I'm not the doer, to quote two sentences by Mary, but I am the cable, and if the cable is not there, then nothing passes, right? I'm not the energy that fixes anything, I am the cable that allows the energy that harmonizes everything to pass through. And the delicacy of the listening that the cable brings to it contributes. The more I hold that I am a very fine cable, the less ample the flow will tend to be. So humility to me is the mix of knowing that it is what it is. Yeah? I am the kind of listener that I am. It's a blessing for any of us that we are able to listen to the extent that each of us, and we may each be able in varying degrees, but no matter what your degree of ability to listen, that level of ability to listen is a blessing. And the fact that you're not able currently to listen any more delicately is not a curse. It just is what is. The less you deny And the less you claim that for yourself, the more I believe you are in that true sense of humility. You are getting yourself out of the way. You're making yourself neither bigger nor smaller, and your bignesses and smallnesses are not much of an issue. Not big enough an issue to either be denied or particularized. That to me is the true sense of humility as I understand it, right? There's no need for me to pretend something isn't what it is, and there's no need for me to make a big deal out of what is. And then the fact that Jin-Shin-Jyutsu was part of traditional Japanese medicine and was so devalued even during his lifetime. You see, this is another one of those stories we hear about Jin-Shin-Jyutsu that is misleading, because nothing that he then called Jin-Shin-Jyutsu and gave a certain form to was part of Japanese culture. Yes, there's a general cultural understanding that there's something formless called ki in Japanese, meaning energy, undergirds physical existence, informs physical existence. There was that basic understanding, but no methodology that he taught to the world was previously used in just that way. People have used their hands for as long as humans have had hands, I'm sure, to help themselves and help and maybe heal others. But this idea that Jin-Shin-Jyutsu books were in every Japanese household until a few hundred years before Jerome is completely misleading. It's also a kind of projection of a golden age that isn't helpful, So no, it's not a specific methodology that used to be there and then was forgotten. It's almost more like what you will find in the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, who also makes it sound like, the sages of old remembered the Tao and didn't get lost in the 10,000 things. So, So the question then continues. It does make me wonder what it means for us, having grown up in Western societies, to cultivate the fully holistic sensibility that might be more possible growing up in an indigenous culture, and that perhaps each of us has to undertake some kind of similar journey to Mirai, in the sense of discovering deeply our own perceptual clarity, our own listening, our own ability to not be bothered by the mainstream culture around us. Again, I just don't know enough about indigenous cultures to be able to say that in any helpful way we'd be more in tune if we'd grown up in a different culture. I don't. The contributions we each bring to listening to the world is so unique that I think it is wise for us, as Westerners in the widest sense of that word, to work with the full gifts of whatever culture and context it is that we come from, and bring those gifts, and waste no time on idealizing something that we did not receive as children of our culture, as children of our family, you see where I was already bridging to here. We can always imagine ourselves with better nurturing by our teachers, with better nurturing by our parents. If we weren't who we are, we'd be someone else. But let's not waste time on that. Right now, yes, we do each have to develop our own deep listening, our own unique, and in some way therefore lonely skill to make the world more by listening to it in a certain way. And I'll leave it at that for now. The question continues on, but I'm mindful of the hour, so I'll address this maybe at the end of the month in our live members call, or go into it next month's Q&A. Taj sends the following appreciation in teaching video 4 in module 4 of this Reimagining Pulse course. You mentioned the 5, 6, 7, 8 flow as useful for all toe flows. I went to the year 1 foundation course and studied that module from January 2020. For those of you who are not aware, in the first 33 months of the online study circle, I went through what's called Trinity energy in Jin Shin Jyutsu. That's the main central, the supervisors, the mediators. And then I went through the depths and the safety energy locks, one by one. These are all available with lifetime access on the website. I'll be showing the link to later. Year 1 of these 33 months is what Taj is referring to here. So, your description, she says, of the fiving courage of the rose to blossom with the invitation of the sun speaks to my relation to this pulse course of yours so far. Thank you so much, from Rosie Taj. So the image of the 5-petaled flower, that is the rose, as expressed in a beautiful poem by 14th century Persian Sufi master and mystic Hafiz, as translated or transcribed into English by Daniel Ledinsky, published by Pelican Random House, I think. Well, you'll easily find it. How Does the Rose is the title of or How Did the Rose? The title of a poem where Hafiz simply poses the question of how does the rose manage to open up? And then he says, it felt the sun's encouragement against its heart. Without it, we all stay too frightened. So to me, the essence of number 5, which is, in Mary's words, the number of the human being, the essence of inhabiting your 5ness, your full humanness, is that you dare, although it is risky, open up to life, open up to experience, because you are encouraged by aliveness itself, symbolized as the sun, something that warms you and encourages you to open up to what's there and what's there to perceive. So that's that image of the rose. This month, I took a day to do all the feeling exercises in a row. This is the chapter Experience, right? This month, I took a day to do all the feeling exercises in a row from Safety Energy Locks 1 through 9 from your Year 1 module. It was freshly virginal because I had been away from the content and the meaning for a while, and just had my body and movement in the moment as my reference point. There were lots of surprises. Wow, so this is what 2 does to 1, is one of them. Or, quote, pulling back my head ever so little for Safety Energy Lock 2, and I've got 100% of what's happening from 1. Or, the small intestinally experience of walking through my 5, 6, 7. Or the enigmatic 360-degree circumference inning and outing addition of 8. And the balanced just right nudge from number 9s. Quite trippy at the time. Oh, did I forget number 3? Never. I find myself walking with a whole different moving, present awareness and lively balance as a result. Thank you. I must admit it's taken a while to include as equally important the feeling exercises when the data content is so juicy, especially when or if there happens to be a fixing orientation. It is only understandable that when we learn Jin Shin Jyutsu, part of us still wants to know, how do I fix people or myself with it? That's the fixing orientation Taj is referring to here. But a year and a half of your persistence, and I am inspired to do more with the feeling exercises I have and the ones to come. So happy you haven't given up. So I never give up on insisting on the feeling exercises, and in most of the chapters throughout those 33 months, I think it's in most of the chapters, I insist when I come to the hands-on self-help, I insist that feeling into the safety energy lock is already effective and efficient self-help. So that's the experience. Now for the questions that Taja has for the month. Shortcuts. We have the 5, 6, 7, 8 flow for all toe flows. 20, 21, 22 for all face flows. Is there any similar shortcut for all chest flows? Actually, Mary didn't call them shortcuts, but common denominators. Yeah, so she gave 5, 6, 7, 8 flows for toe flows. She gave 20, 21 for face flows, 20, 21, 22, I mean. She gave the 10 flow for all chest flows, and she gave the 13 flow for all finger flows. There are also other common denominators out there. These are the ones I personally heard her share, but it is not surprising that she would have shared different ones at different points. If you look at the 13 flow in her textbook 1, she actually says in so many words that this is a combination of large intestine, small intestine, and umbilicus flows with the main central. Small intestine, large intestine, small intestine, and umbilicus are the 3 finger flows. So she says it explicitly that the 13 flow is a common denominator or summary or shortcut, if you will, for those 3 flows. Balancing depths is what the next question is in reference to. With reference to module 2 on textures, the fun exercise, had us balance a texture, a depth, with the appropriate fingers. This is when I invited members to listen to their own pulses and find the texture, and once they had settled on the texture they were feeling, hold the corresponding finger to harmonize that depth. So the question is, what other flows, other than the organ function energy flows for particular depth, balance the depths? For example, from your year 1 module, when you say safety energy lock 4 is related to second depth, does that mean safety energy lock 4 is a harmonizer for second depth if that texture is drawing my attention? I have not gone back to that module concerning safety energy lock number 4, and I am most surprised to read that I said it had a relationship to second depth. If I say so there, I'm pretty certain I must say why. It isn't currently striking my fancy why 4 in particular would be related to second depth. But Mary actually said you can harmonize a depth through all of its safety energy locks, so for second depth that's not very practical, or it definitely isn't a shortcut, because it means 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. That's 11 safety energy locks total. She also gave us the positive numbers for the depths. That would be, for second depth, number 9. So you could use number 9. But I just simply find that harmonizing a depth, when I mean it in its totality, is best and most quickly and most deeply accomplished by holding its corresponding finger. If you are wanting to harmonize a depth in another person and want to do more than just holding the finger, doing the flow, which in Mary's language is called the flow of reversing and increasing the corresponding depth, is also another good one. But why not just stick with the finger, which is simple? Next question, fingers' relation to wrist pulses. Are the pulses only with reference to the wrist? Meaning, for example, is there something about the middle finger of right hand specifically turned to third depth? Waist line and gallbladder liver when listening at the wrist. Thanks again for making all this simple and fun. So thank you for that question, Taj. What Taj is referring to is the fact that we listen in a very specific place at the wrist with each of our fingers, index, middle, and ring. And the right middle finger, when placed in that particular place at the wrist, picks up on how third depth in the superficial pulse gallbladder, in the deep pulse liver is doing. So it is third depth on organ function level that is being heard, not because it's the middle finger, but because that place on a person's left wrist, which I touch with my right hand, that place on a person's wrist refers to the middle of the body, refers to, if it's the left wrist, third depth, and if it's the right wrist, first depth. So no, there is no finger relationship independently of the placement at the wrist when it comes to what the fingers hear in the pulses. The finger relationships to depths that you know, that you find in Self Book 1, are valid, but here the pulse listening fingers are instruments. We are only talking about them as instruments. Yeah? So if I placed my index finger on the left wrist of the client in the place where the middle finger is supposed to be placed, then it would be my index finger or any other finger placed at that same place on the wrist that would then hear third depth on organ flow level and the midriff or the midline of the body, the waistline of the body. Thank you for asking that useful question. And with that, we come to the end of today's gathering and Q&A. I hope you got some useful things, and anyone curious to find out more, check out elearning.matthiasjsj.de and find what fun things are available there. Have a great evening, and I'll see you next month.